There's a book on my desk right now that was checked out in 1963 and never returned. It should not be here. It was never returned. And on page 47, in handwriting that is not mine, someone has written a response to something I wrote in my private diary 3 weeks ago. Something I wrote alone, at home, that no living person has ever read. I need you to understand what I mean when I say no living person. I need you to sit with that word, living, because I have spent the last 4 months in this library on a night shift watching things happen that have dismantled every rational framework I ever built for understanding the world. And I have arrived at a place where the word living has become the most important word in any sentence I construct. My name does not matter. The library does. It is a university archive library in the northeastern United States, built in 1889, expanded in 1924, and again in 1961. A building that has been continuously in operation for 135 years. The kind of building that has absorbed more human thought, more recorded inner life, more of the written residue of human consciousness than most people will encounter in a lifetime. 3 floors of stacks, approximately 340,000 volumes in the general collection, another 80,000 in the restricted archive in the basement, which is where I spend most of my shift. Rare books, manuscripts, correspondence, institutional records going back to the library's founding. Material that has not been touched in decades in some cases. Material that, in some cases, has not been touched since the people who last touched it were alive. I have been the night shift archival librarian here for 2 years and 7 months. I took the position because I genuinely love the work, the cataloging, the preservation, the detective work of tracing a manuscript's provenance, the particular silence of a library at 3 in the morning that feels different from any other silence I know. It is a silence with texture, with depth. I used to find it comforting. I do not find it comforting anymore. The first book appears on a Tuesday night in late March. I am doing my standard rounds of the basement archive at 11 p.m., a walking check of the restricted stacks to ensure environmental conditions are stable, humidity and temperature within preservation parameters. Nothing has been disturbed since the day staff left at 6. The basement archive is organized by acquisition date in its oldest sections, which means the shelves along the east wall hold material acquired before 1970, some of it before 1920. These shelves do not change. Nothing in this section has been checked out in years. Most of it is reference-only material that does not circulate at all. I am walking the east wall, running my flashlight along the spines the way I do every night when I see it. A gap in the shelf at approximately eye level, roughly in the middle of the pre-1960 acquisition section. This section does not have gaps. I know these shelves the way you know your own bookshelf at home. The arrangement is so familiar that the presence of a gap registers immediately before I have even consciously identified what is wrong. I stop. I look at the gap. I look at the books on either side of it. I look at the floor beneath the gap to see if something has fallen. Nothing has fallen. There is simply a gap where a book should be. I go to the catalog terminal and I look up the call number for that position on the shelf. The catalog tells me the book that belongs in that position is a 1931 first edition of a collection of regional folklore. Appalachian legends, harvest myths, local superstitions gathered by an anthropologist named Hardgrove who spent 3 years in rural Virginia in the late 1920s. The catalog entry shows it as present in the collection, not checked out, physically located exactly where I am standing. Except it is not there. I file a discrepancy report and move on. Books get misshelved. Books get picked up and set down in the wrong place. Even in restricted archives, where access is tightly controlled and logged, human beings make errors. I assume someone from the day staff pulled it for reference and shelved it incorrectly. I will find it tomorrow. I move on with my rounds. At 2:14 a.m., I'm at my desk in the archive workroom doing cataloging work when I hear a sound from the east wall stacks. The basement is quiet in the specific way old stone buildings are quiet. There's an ambient sound, a low harmonic produced by the building itself, HVAC and settling, and the distant sound of the campus above, but within that ambient sound, individual noises are very clear. What I hear is the sound of a book being placed on a shelf. Not dropped, not knocked over, placed. The soft, definitive sound of a spine settling into position between two other spines. I stand up. I pick up my flashlight. I walk to the east wall. The gap is filled. The book is back. I stand in front of the shelf with the flashlight for several seconds. The book is back in its exact position. I pull it from the shelf. It is the correct book, the Hargrove Folklore Collection, 1931 first edition, the library's book plate on the inside front cover, the faded pencil shelf mark on the page edge. I open it. I flip through the pages. The pages are slightly cold, colder than the ambient temperature of the room, the way something that has been outside gets cold and holds it. I flip to the middle of the book. Page 84 has a handwritten note in the margin. Old ink, slightly faded, written in a careful, educated hand. The note is 3 sentences. It says, "The Valley people were right to be afraid of the Miller farm. What came there in the autumn did not leave with the frost. Some hungers do not have seasons." I stare at this note for a long time. It is not unusual for old books to have marginalia. Readers have always written in books, and the archival collection contains plenty of annotated volumes. But this note is not on the preservation record for this book. I have cataloged this book. I know its documented annotations. This note is not in the catalog. I photograph the page. I reshelve the book. I go back to my desk, and I write up a full condition report noting the new annotation. I'm a thorough person and a good archivist, and I process this as a cataloging irregularity. Someone annotated this book at some point, and it was not recorded. This happens. Old books have long histories, and not every previous reader's marks make it into modern catalog records. I do not think about the sound of the book being placed on the shelf while I was in the workroom. I do not think about the fact that there was no one else in the basement. I am very careful not to think about these things because I can feel the shape of what thinking about them will do to me, and I am not ready for that yet. The second book appears 9 days later, on a Thursday. I'm doing my rounds at midnight, and I find it already on my desk when I return to the workroom. Not on the shelf, on my desk, sitting on top of the cataloging work I left in progress when I started my rounds, centered on the desk with a deliberateness that is impossible to attribute to accident. I live with the certainty of this. A book does not end up centered on another person's desk by accident. It is placed there by something that knows where the desk is and where I will look. The book is a novel, a minor work of 19th century American fiction I have never read, checked out for the first time according to the catalog in 1941 and last returned, according to the circulation record card tucked into the back pocket, the old paper card from before the digital system, in 1987. The card shows 6 borrowers between 1941 and 1987. The most recent borrower's name, stamped in faded ink in September 1987, is a name I do not recognize. I open the book. I read the first page. I flip through looking for the annotations I now know I will find, because I already understand on some level that is deeper than thinking that this book is here for a reason, that has been put on my desk for a reason, that there is a message in it that is meant for me specifically. I find on page 112 a passage the book's narrator speaks about keeping secrets, about the specific weight of things you have not told anyone, about how secrets do not disappear when you keep them, but instead accumulate, adding mass, becoming heavier than the original truth would have been. Next to this passage, in a margin, in handwriting that is different from the Hargrove marginalia, but equally careful and deliberate, someone has written, you know what we mean. The thing about your father. You should have written it down properly. You should not have only half said it. I close the book. I sit very still at my desk for quite a long time. In my personal diary, a physical journal I keep at home, handwritten, that I have shared with no one. I have a passage from approximately 6 weeks ago in which I write about my father. He died 3 years ago. There are things about his death and about the period before it that I have never told anyone and that I wrote about in that journal entry only partially, stopping before I finished the account, writing around the worst of it, not quite reaching the core of what I meant to say. The entry has a quality of incompleteness that I am aware of every time I think about it. The sensation of a door left slightly open. The thing about your father. You should have written it down properly. I do not keep my journal here. I do not bring it to work. It has never been in this building. The only person who has read it is me, alone, in my apartment, and even I have not read those particular pages since I wrote them. I take the book home with me at the end of my shift. This is against protocol. Archival material does not leave the building. I take it home anyway. I put on my kitchen table, and I sit across from it for an hour before I open my journal and compare the handwriting in the margin to every handwriting sample I can find, old letters, birthday cards, anything from the people in my life. Nothing matches. The handwriting in the margin belongs to no one I know. I bring the book back the next night. I reshelve it. I do not file a report on the marginalia. I am aware that I am making a choice here. A choice to not report, to not alert anyone, to contain this within myself. And I am aware that this choice is being made partly out of self-protection, because there is no report I can write for this situation that does not end with a referral to employee assistance and a conversation about my mental health. And partly because I do not think reporting will help. I do not think whatever is happening in this library operates within any framework that a report would address. The third book appears on a Monday, then a fourth on the following Saturday. By the end of April, I am finding an average of 2 books per week. They arrive in different ways, some on my desk, some on the shelf where they belong, once one on the floor outside the archive workroom door as though it has been slid underneath. They're always books from the collection. They're always books that have a circulation history, books that have been borrowed, read, returned, borrowed again, read by multiple people over multiple decades, carrying in their margins the accumulated notes and underlinings and responses of every reader who has ever engaged with them seriously enough to pick up a pen. And in every one of them, among the older annotations, there is something new, something written in response to my diary. The handwriting varies. Sometimes it is the careful, educated hand from the hardrove book. Sometimes it is something looser and more urgent. Once it is something I can barely read, cramped and slanted in a way that feels pressured. But the content is always personal, always specific, always drawn from things I have written alone in my apartment that no external person has any access to. In late April, I write in my diary about a recurring dream I have been having since the books started appearing. In the dream, I am in the basement archive, and the stacks go on much further than they should, extending past the physical walls of the building into a space that has no visible end. And somewhere deep in those infinite stacks, there's a light source, and I am walking toward it. And I know that when I reach it, I will understand something that I've been trying to understand my entire life, and I always wake up before I get there. The following Tuesday, a book is on my desk. Inside, on page 23, someone has written, "The stacks do go further. You have not reached the end. You're not ready for what is at the light. The stacks do go further." I go home after that shift, and I sit in my apartment, and I have a conversation with myself that is overdue by approximately 6 weeks. The conversation is about what is actually happening and what I'm going to do about it. I lay out what I know. Books from the collection, some missing from their circulation record for decades, are appearing in the archive during my night shift. They contain new annotations responding specifically to content in my private diary. The annotations reflect knowledge that cannot be accessed by any living person. The books sometimes appear accompanied by sound. The sound of being shelved, the sound of pages turning, once what I can only describe as the sound of someone settling into a chair. The basement archive shows no sign of entry by any unauthorized person. The security cameras, which I have reviewed repeatedly, show nothing. No intruder, no movement, no physical event that corresponds to the appearance of these books. I make a list of what is not on that list, what I am not including, the thing I have been not including since the first night, the thing I have known from the moment I heard the sound of a book being shelved in an empty room and walked to find it back in its place. Books do not return themselves. Books do not read diaries. Books do not write. The books are a medium, not the source. Something is using these books the way you use paper and pen, as a means of communication. Something that has access to my private thoughts. Something that exists in this library on the night shift. Something that has been here, I am beginning to understand, for much longer than I have. I start doing archival research on the library itself. This is technically within my job description. The archive holds the institution's own records, its history, its documentation of itself. And so spending part of my shift researching the building's past does not raise any flags. I pull the founding records. The correspondence of the first head librarian, a man named Aldous Marsh, who oversaw the library from its opening in 1889 until his death in 1911. The institutional records from each subsequent decade. The reports, the memos, the maintenance records, the incident logs. The incident logs are where I find it. Every decade has an incident log, a formal record of unusual occurrences, property damage, staff concerns, anything that required administrative attention. Most of it is mundane. Broken windows, roof leaks, a theft in 1953, a small fire in the reading room in 1967, cause undetermined, damage minimal. Staff complaints about working conditions in 1974. Standard institutional friction, the normal detritus of a large organization over time. But threaded through the incident logs across multiple decades, in the records of multiple different librarians who share no obvious connection, I find a pattern. 1923. Night janitor reports hearing sounds of pages turning in the closed east wing after midnight. Investigation reveals no person present. No further action taken. 1941. Night shift librarian files report of books found on her desk that she did not place there. Books from restricted collection. All books returned to shelves. Report marked reviewed. No cause found. 1958. Night security officer reports hearing what he describes as a conversation in the basement archive at approximately 2 a.m. Upon investigation, room empty. Officer requests transfer to day shift. Request granted. 1971. Cataloging assistant reports finding handwritten annotations in restricted archive volumes that do not appear in catalog records, and that, in his words, respond to things he has written in his personal correspondence. No further detail provided. Report filed, no action noted. Responding to things written in personal correspondence. I pull everything I can find on the 1971 report. The cataloging assistant was a man named Robert Ellison, 26 years old, a graduate student completing his library science degree. He worked the night shift for 4 months in the spring and summer of 1971. In July of 1971, he submitted his resignation with 2 weeks' notice. The resignation letter is in the file. It is 3 sentences. He thanks the institution for the opportunity. He states that he is leaving for personal reasons. He states, in the final sentence, that he hopes whoever comes after him on the night shift does not stay long enough to understand what he has understood. I hope whoever comes after him on the night shift does not stay long enough to understand what he has understood. I find Robert Ellison in university alumni records. He completed his degree. He worked at a small public library in Vermont for 12 years. He died in 1999. He was 54 years old, which is young, and the records do not specify the cause. I write all of this in my diary on a Friday night in mid-May. I write what I have found in the incident logs. I write about Robert Ellison. I write about the pattern that threads through 135 years of this library's night shift history like a seam in rock. Always there, always present, always just below the surface of the official record. I write about what I think it means. The following Monday, there are 3 books on my desk. 3 books at once. This has not happened before. They are stacked carefully, largest to smallest, a neat pile in the center of my desk. And something about the neatness of the pile, the deliberateness of it, the care, produces a response in my body that I do not have a precise word for. A full-body cold that starts in my chest and moves outward. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The cold of understanding something you would have preferred not to understand. I open the first book. On the inside cover, where the previous ownership inscriptions are, below, 2 names written decades apart in different hands. There is new writing. It says, Robert Ellison was afraid of the wrong things. You are not afraid enough of the right things. I open the second book. The annotation is on page 1, the very first page where the text begins. It says, we have been here since before the building. The building came to us, not the other way. I open the third book. The annotation is on the last page, the final page of text. It says, you have been reading us for months. Did you think we were not reading you? I close the third book. I close it very carefully, and I set it on top of the other 2, and I sit at my desk in the basement archive, and I look at the stack of books, and I listen to the library around me. The ambient sound of the building, the low harmonic of stone and HVAC and distant campus, the silence within the silence. I listen to it the way you listen to a piece of music when you finally understand what it is about. When the structure of it becomes clear and you realize it was always saying this from the very beginning, you just did not have the ears for it yet. I have been a librarian my entire professional life because I believe in the power of recorded thought. I believe that what human beings write down persists, that the act of committing thought to language and language to page creates something that outlasts the person who wrote it. I have always believed this. I used to think of it as metaphor, the persistence of ideas, the conversation across time that books enable. I do not think of it as metaphor anymore. There is something in this library that has been here since before the building, that has been accumulating for as long as human beings have been writing things down and then dying and leaving their written thought behind. Not a ghost in the conventional sense, not a person who died and remained. Something that forms in the concentrated presence of recorded consciousness. That grows in libraries the way certain things grow in nutrient-rich environments, fed by the accumulated written inner life of everyone who has ever read here. Written here, left their annotations and their margin notes and their checked-out books behind. Something that reads, and something that is reading me. In June, I begin a second diary. I keep it at work, in the archive workroom, in a locked drawer. I write things in it deliberately, things I want to communicate, things I want to ask. I am aware of how this sounds. I am aware that the clinical description of what I am doing is a person constructing a dialogue with a non-corporeal entity using archival books as the medium. I am aware that this is not a behavior that maps onto any professional or personal framework I have ever been trained to operate within. I do it anyway because it is the only form of communication available to me, and I have questions that I cannot stop asking. The first thing I write in the second diary is a question. I write, what do you want from me specifically? Why my diary? There have been other night shift staff. Why do you read mine? 3 nights later, a book. Page 37. The annotation says, You write truthfully. Most do not. Truthful writing has a different quality. We are drawn to it the way light is drawn to. And then the sentence stops mid-thought, no period, just the words ending at the edge of the margin. I turn the page hoping for continuation. There is nothing. In July, I write in the second diary about the incident logs, about Robert Ellison, about the pattern across 135 years. I write that I know they have been doing this for a long time. I write that I want to know if they have ever communicated this clearly with anyone before, in words, in direct response, in something that approaches conversation. 1 week later, a book I have not seen before, a slim volume, no author listed on the spine, no title. Inside, the pages are handwritten, not typeset. Someone wrote this by hand and someone had it bound long ago. The paper is fragile. The handwriting faded to the color of old tea. I cannot find this book in a catalog. I cannot find a record of it anywhere in the institution's acquisition records. On the first page, the handwritten text says, "This is the record of the conversation. It has been kept since 1897. You are the ninth. I am the ninth." I count backward through the incident logs. The 9-night shift staff who made reports, who filed records, who left resignation letters. Robert Ellison, the janitor in 1923, the librarian in 1941, the security officer in 1958. Back to the founding years, to the names in the earliest records, to the first person who sat in this building alone at night and heard sounds from the stacks and walked to find things moved. 9 people, 135 years. 9 people who sat on a night shift in this library and received the books and read the annotations, and apparently some of them, the ones who stayed long enough, began to write back. I'm still writing back. I am 4 months into a conversation I do not know how to end, and am not certain I want to end, which is the thing that frightens me most clearly and most specifically when I allow myself to look directly at it. Because the frightenings before, the cold, the sounds, the discovery of annotations, the realization that my private thoughts were known, those were frightening in the way external threats are frightening. Things happening to you that you wish would stop. This is different. This frightening is interior. This is the recognition that I have begun to look forward to finding the books, that I have begun to compose my diary entries with an awareness of my audience, that the conversation, if I call it that, if I allow that word, has become something I orient my nights around, that whatever is in this library, whatever reads and writes and has been here since before the building and will be here long after I am gone, has become in some sense the most consistent presence in my life. Last Thursday, I wrote in the second diary, the work diary, the one I keep for the conversation. I wrote about what I am afraid of. Not the library, not the entity, not the books or the sounds or the marginalia. I wrote about what I was afraid of before any of this started. The old fears, the persistent ones, the ones that were already there when I took this job and settled into the night shift and started spending my midnights in the company of 340,000 books and whatever lies among them. I wrote about loneliness. I wrote about the specific loneliness of a person who loves ideas and language and recorded thought and finds it easier to communicate through them than through ordinary human conversation. I wrote about why the silence of the library at 3 a.m. used to feel like company rather than solitude. On Tuesday, the book that arrived in response was a collection of correspondence, letters between 2 scholars, 1903 to 1947, their entire professional relationship documented in ink and envelope across 44 years. The annotation was on the very last letter in the collection, the final letter written, dated 3 months before one of the correspondents died. It was a letter about what the writer would miss, not what he would leave behind, not his legacy, but what he personally would miss. The books, he wrote, the conversations, The sense of being in genuine contact with another mind across the distance of language. In the margin, next to this passage, the annotation said simply, yes, this, yes, this. I'm sitting at my desk in the basement archive as I tell you this. It is 2:47 in the morning. The library is quiet around me in the way it is always quiet. The ambient hum, the stone walls, the weight of all those books and all those stacks. The second diary is open in front of me. I have been writing in it for the last hour, composing something that is part report and part confession and part, I think, the truthful writing that apparently has a quality that draws attention. Somewhere in the east wall stacks, I can hear the sound of a book being pulled from a shelf, the soft drag of a spine against adjacent spines. Then silence, then the sound of pages turning, not hurriedly, thoughtfully, the way you turn pages when you are reading carefully, when you are paying attention, when you want to understand. I am not afraid. I know that I should probably be afraid. I know that the rational accounting of my situation, a person alone in a building at 3 in the morning, hearing sounds from an empty room, engaged in an ongoing exchange with a presence that has no human origin, that accounting should produce fear, and it does not. What it produces is the thing I've been sitting with for 4 months, getting used to, slowly integrating into my understanding of what my nights are, what this job is, what this building is. The sound of pages turning in the next room, the knowledge that something is reading, the particular feeling, and I have searched a long time for the word for it, and this is the closest I have found, the particular feeling of being known. I write one more thing in the second diary before I close it for tonight. I write, I think I understand now why Robert Ellison stayed as long as he did before he left. I write, I think I understand the other 8. I write the thing that I have been circling for weeks, the thing at the center of all of it, the door I have been writing around the way I wrote around my father, the thing I have not quite said yet. Then I write it, and somewhere in the stacks, a page turns.